Hey everybody, this is Anoop. I'm going to be exploring the topic of identity today with my friend Greg Murray, who's a developmental psychologist. So let's see. I gotta try to have him join. Let's see how this will work. So I'm trying to see if he'll jump on here and then I can invite him. Here we go. Get you on here, Greg. Looks like it's all right.
There he is. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm glad it worked. I wasn't sure if it was going to work.
Yeah, I've done this once before, but it seems to be doing all right. If I get kicked off, I'll just come back.
Okay. All right. Great. So this is Greg Murray. I'm meeting him along with you for the first time. I saw him on Twitter a few days ago and he commented something you said, Greg. You said something like, finally, it's nice to see an MD who's talking about identity.
Yeah,
And that caught my eye. I do feel that identity is very important. In fact, I would say the central cog in unraveling everything. And I know you're a developmental psychologist. So maybe first you can just tell us a little bit about your background and what you do.
yeah, I was really excited to see you talking about identity for sure, because it's imperative, it's crucial, it's fundamental to how we experience the world. So, as a developmental psychologist, I think you know I do coaching, and what I'm doing is applying theories from social psychology, as well as developmental psychology, as far as for the actual construction part, to help people, you know, define who they are in the world, and develop themselves, whether it's professionally or personally. So it's had some interesting applications, as people have contacted me for professional goals, whether it's organizational, learning to work together as a team in a group, learning to develop like who am I as a leader, what do I believe in and why, what do I need to change, and then also on the personal side, I mean, people are going through life changes all the time, major life changes, whether it's grief, new careers, graduating college. Like there's so many points in our life, especially as millennials now are getting older, where we're changing like massively every 5 years, especially in the professional world. So huge changes in our life. And so the difference between me and maybe some other people, especially therapists or mentors, is I'm putting a lot of theory on the table, and keeping that, like I have a specific method that I was trained in at Harvard, immunity to change with Bob Keegan. It's constructive development. So you're constructing your identity. So it's pretty cool, and it's very scientific as far as like, you know, there's actual exercises. So it's not like I'm just asking people questions and they're talking. Like there's a lot of actual work going on. So it's pretty cool.
All right. So what is your view of identity? I have my own views, and then maybe we can compare notes and see what overlaps and what doesn't.
Yeah, so you know, this is all social, right? As far as the schools that I'm coming from, and the idea is that our identities are given to us until we reach a certain age where we become conscious of these things, which most people will understand as adolescence, and they'll immediately get triggered by middle school, high school, whatever it is, and you realize you're responsible and you're capable of defining your identity. And so these come from the roles we play, you know, in the family. Many times they have names, many times they don't. You know, I'm a good brother, I'm a good engineer, I'm a good teacher, like all of these things. And so what I found is that people's emotions are attached to these identities in the way that they're attached to their physical body. And so you fear not being a good brother, you fear not being a good engineer, in the same way as you would kind of fear for your physical safety. So it's because it's the same emotions. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, and it's yeah. Did that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. So it's like every role is a kind of identity. So for example, right now I might be identified as a communicator. In another role, I might be identifying as a physician. In another
Hmm.
role, I might identify as a husband or father or son. And so we have these social identities that
Hmm.
are relative to the culture that I'm immersed in. Is that what you're saying? And talking about how we navigate these identities?
Yeah, it's completely culturally dependent. I'm so glad you said that too. So yeah, communicator's not one that I had thought of, but we have it's really in opposition to personality. The idea is that we don't have a personality. We have identities that are picked up in the brain. This is in neuroscience as well, the identity salience network. So we are activated by what the environment is telling us, and we're saying, okay, what am I doing here? What is my role in the space? So yeah, the culture is huge. I mean, I moved from the States to France, and my emotions completely changed. Like in the States, you're expected to be happy, right? Right. Everybody's smiling. Everybody's
Right,
really performing joy.
right.
In France, it's just not the case. So it's pretty interesting, the cultural differences.
So are you saying there's a difference between personality and identity, or can you distinguish for me personality and identity?
Yeah, they're pretty incompatible.
Mhm.
At least as far as I understand it, I tried. I mean, Twitter is good for some things, and I try to engage with people on there, and it's just people are not willing to discuss.
Yeah.
But in my view, through this lens, personality doesn't exist, and I think it's inherent in a lot of people's beliefs. People are talking about identity a whole lot nowadays, but the problem is that personality became popular culture, and now personalities in clinical handbooks, right? Personality disorders, and so we've got a bunch of people diagnosed with personality disorders, and a clinician's holding on to this theory of personality that there's another theory of social identity and identity that directly contradicts it. So it's definitely it's so. If you think of like like dominance would be extroversion, all of these things that people think of as personality traits, they're completely identity based. So I could be very outgoing as a teacher, right? Because that's the role I'm playing. And then at home, be very quiet, shy. So am I an extrovert or an introvert? And then people will say I'm an ambivert. It's like, come on, there's it's identity.
Right, right. Yeah, I would agree with that. I like the way that you're saying, I like the words that you're using. It's definitely true for me. The way I interact, for example, the way I am on this particular call is a particular way. For me, it's certainly an identity as a communicator. I'm
Hmm.
choosing, I would say, to occupy a particular range of mind where I
Hmm.
can understand what you're saying. And at the same time, I have access to another experience, which I can also try to put in words. So I need to keep a range of identity, for example, that has access to language and
Yeah,
that
yeah,
has access to cognition, which most people don't think of as an identity, but it very much is so. It's
yeah,
choosing a range of the mind. So, and the personalities, as you said, can look very different. The
yes.
personality or the expression or the way the identity engages and interfaces with the world is different depending on that range that is chosen.
Totally. And that's what I love about your work is that you're completely coming at it from a different lens. That's why I was excited to talk to you of like identity doesn't just have to be social. I'm a
Yeah,
big meditator. I'm a big
yeah,
meditator too. And
yeah.
the only identities are thought of as social is because we have language for those. We don't have language for this internal world, this internal spiritual experience. So I really love that about your work.
Yeah. And that's interesting. So those phrases, internal spiritual experience. So at a particular range of identity, specifically identity with particularity, meaning like identity as an individual, not as an individual communicator or as an individual physician or as an individual psychologist, but as an individuality in itself. Identifying as an individuality and with a body, for
Yeah,
example,
with the body. Yeah,
is itself what creates the lens of internality and externality,
right.
right? So even internal, external is itself a range of identity. It's not that
Hmm.
identity, in my view, it's not that identity is internal. And
Right.
this is where the society, like the leading edges of many sciences that I see and philosophies are about trying to reconcile subjective and objective perspectives. And
Yes.
so like Niels Bohr was famous for saying that, it's difficult to wrap I'm paraphrasing, difficult to wrap our minds around this idea of subjective and objective. Like what we're discovering in physics is
Mm,
showing us that this idea of subjective and objective is maybe not what we think it is. And
yeah.
perhaps then that's because it itself is dependent on where we park our range of identity.
Yeah, and this is reminding me of language. And so Wittgenstein is a very famous philosopher who studied language, and according to him, um, language shapes how we believe, how we view the world. And so if you think about language has subject and object, right? He hit her. Like there's a subject there and it separates. So we are born and we automatically we have because we have individual bodies and we have a language that tells us we are separate. We grow up with the belief that we are, and it's interesting. I like that. But now, how do you reconcile this that I am trapped in my body? I am like there is part of me that's trapped in this body. So especially with medicine
Yeah.
and healing, and that's what's really interesting because I can't.
Yeah.
You know, I know you've got first, second, and third body, which is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's it. So when we say I am trapped in the body, the question is, what does the I refer to, right? What is the identity that is representing itself as I?
Right,
And the identity that says I am trapped in the body is what I call the first mind,
right.
right? So there is a range of identity that is associated with the body, and not only associated with the body, it feels like it's somewhere localized in and around the head.
Mm,
That in our culture, in the Western culture predominantly, I would say in the
yeah,
United States, I'm not sure about Europe as much, I can't speak to that, but
yeah.
definitely in the United States, the sense of identity that is associated with the body is often localized in or around the head. And it's just this feeling, we would call it a subjective feeling of
Mm,
identity. And so that's why, like in meditation and spirituality, people will talk about we need to calm down the mind because there's this buzzing sensation. We talk about the monkey mind, we talk about all these things, but in fact, we're only talking about the first mind. All of those labels and descriptions apply to this very narrow range of identity that feels as if it is localized with the body.
yes.
There are other ranges of identity, which I call, for example, the second mind, in which there is no necessary association with the body. It can associate with the
Mm,
body. However, it is not restricted to that. In fact, the body itself is a range of that mind from the second mind identity perspective.
mm,
Whereas from the first mind identity perspective, the body is primary. This is the materialist kind of paradigm. The body is primary, and the sense of
mm,
identity is created by the brain. From the
yeah.
second mind perspective, there's a fundamental, let's say, awareness or potential or consciousness, whatever we
Mm.
want to call it, in which appear the sensations that we call physicality.
So, how would you distinguish, or because it'd be interesting to find shared language
Yes.
with second mind and collective consciousness, or like identity? This is what I love about identity is that if I'm saying I'm a first generation college student, for example, this does transcend my body because I'm experiencing a unique interaction with the world that thousands of other people are also experiencing. So do we have a shared second mind or like and collective consciousness? What yeah, how do you
Right, right. So there's a range of ideas. It's not first mind and then second mind
mm,
as two, dichotomous experiences. No. There's an entire range and gradient of experience. So for example, identity as a person right now. However, I also have an identity in relationship with you as a conversation, right?
mm-hmm,
Which,
mm-hmm.
which when this conversation stops, it's not there, but actually it's still there to some extent because we're still kind of messaging over Twitter. You see what I'm saying? There's an entire range. I also
Yes.
have identity as a family, right? With my wife and my son, broader family with other family members, even
Yes.
broader as this neighborhood, community, nation, all of these, they're all ranges of identity. And each one is like a cognitive notch that we label, but
Yes.
the identity itself is not restricted to those notches. It is across an entire gradient, but we only recognize some of them, and that's what we label with language as family or
Yeah.
as physicians or as first generation, college student.
Right. Totally.
Yeah.
So second mind is it fair to say that I could compare that to collective consciousness, or it's without human? Is it more just like the consciousness that exists before we put words on it, or?
Yes, I would say that it is a consciousness or an intelligence or a mind, however one wants to use a word. It is that which is prior to particularization, that which is prior to localization.
Hmm.
So if I feel like I am this, prior to that thisness, that discreteness of the thisness,
Hmm.
prior to that is the second mind, which
Hmm.
then localizes as this first mind. Oh, I'm Anoop and I'm talking to Greg, and these kinds of ideas can happen only in physics. I think forgot who came up with the term. I don't know if it was Wheeler, John Wheeler, but he talked about the participatory universe, or somebody talked about the participatory universe,
Hmm.
meaning that this kind of first mind perspective co-arises with what it is perceiving, the subject-object duality. They
Right.
co-arise. So, for example, right now, you're seeing my face, I'm seeing your face. It is not that what is here fundamentally are these faces, but rather there is a potential here which is recognizable, which is experienceable, including through the five senses. It is experienceable in its own way, for which our first mind culture has no language yet, at least no agreed
Hmm.
upon language. It
Right.
is experienceable in another way prior to the discreteness of vision, sound, smell, taste, touch, etc. And
Hmm.
that is the second mind, which would be called a potential state only because all of this has already localized at the first
Right.
mind level.
Yeah, I appreciate that about sensation. And I'm big on intuition or interoception, like
Yeah,
basically just understanding something because you feel it.
yeah,
And I'm big on that, really big on that,
yeah.
because you don't always need logic. And if we're honest, we are constantly using logic to explain what we feel, anyways.
Well, that's what logic is.
Yes, so it's like, so I think feeling and intuition takes a bad rap, but it's interesting because what's the end goal here? If the second mind exists, like if I believe that it does. I'm saying if we get everybody right on board, what's that going to lead us towards?
Yeah,
And yeah, what's the goal there?
yeah. So there are many kind of intermediate, like what happens as this kind of experience unfolds. One is that, and this is, I think we would be entirely on agreement on this. Let me know if I'm correct. Is that all the social stories, the social narratives about what is and what has to be fall away from the realm of fact and they become simply ways to experience the world.
Yeah.
That's number one, right? Because there's so many stories that are, for example, cultural that we don't recognize as cultural stories. For example, that you have to go to school growing up, that you have to have a degree, that
Yeah.
if you have a degree and if you're at a fancy university or this, that means you're intelligent. Otherwise, maybe you're not as intelligent, right?
Right.
That you have to get married or at least maybe have a partner, maybe have a couple kids. 401k is really important. Have a home, maybe a couple cars. And then at some point along this journey, happiness occurs, right? This is kind of like a social story that is told.
100%. 100%.
Right. So
Yeah.
one of the first thing that happens as one walks away from the first mind as a only way to live, let's say,
Right.
then all of these kind of become these kind of floating stories that we choose or not choose, right? And
Mm.
they no longer become guidelines by which we have to live. They're kind of choices.
Choices.
I'd
Yes.
say I'd say that's one. The other thing is there are many experiences of being human that are considered rare experiences or that we don't have access to on a regular basis. One example is ecstasy. Ecstasy in our culture is happens either through physical orgasm
Right.
or through popping a drug or through maybe some intense, like life-threatening kind of situation or life-changing situation.
Right.
It's not something that's considered, hey, ecstasy, let's have fun. This should be something that every human being can recognize. That idea isn't there. But as one approaches the second mind, because the boundary of the body starts to dissolve, the restriction of the body starts to dissolve, And the idea that what I am is primarily a physical thing, and that's the only way to access the physiology of the body, as those start to fall away, then ways of accessing, for example, states of ecstasy are simply just like accessing, the camera that I have next to me, right? You pick it
Yeah,
up and you experience it for a while and you put it down. So similarly, there are experiences like ecstasy or love or other things that are generally important, I feel, in rounding out a lifetime
totally.
that become more accessible. And on the other hand of that, we also don't necessarily have to run from uncertainty. We don't have to run from not
Mm,
knowing. We don't have to run from confusion or fear because the other end of the spectrum is there. See, we're always running from a lot of these things because the other balancing part is not there, like either the experience of love or the
mm,
experience of peace or the experience of ecstasy. And that's why these are extolled in spirituality classically, because that other end is not there. But if the other end is there, then uncertainty and all those other things are actually kind of pathways to that. So these are
totally.
some of the preliminary changes that I think are life-changing and that are important in the context of a culture as the second mind is appreciated. And there are many more relative to trauma and,
Mm.
medicine and many more.
I could totally see the link to trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah, because and it's incredibly stressful to believe a story. It's
Yes.
incredibly stressful to believe a story and believe that you are a secondary character or even the bad guy in the story or
Yeah. Yeah.
but so this concept is incredibly relieving emotionally. This
Yeah.
second mind, just to be able to access that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It's the dependency. I think it's the dependency that makes a difference. See, the first
yes,
mind is extremely useful. It's functional. It's a way to grow. It's a way to learn. All this is there and all the experience is there. It's that when we that's the only way to live, or that is what being human is about, then comes a problem because then the extended range or the full range of being human is no longer accessible, or it has to become something else, like it has to be spiritual or it has
mm,
to be religious.
right.
Or, we have to
Separate.
categorize it or
Yes,
mystical. It's got to become weird in some way.
it has to be separate.
And then it becomes a different discipline. But what I'm saying is, no, the entire range is important. That's why we're here. It's not about letting go and eradicating the first mind, which also happens. But no, it's about kind of embracing that full range of experience.
I love it.
Yeah. So I also saw on your Twitter description you mentioned neurodivergence and neurodiversity. How does
Yeah.
that tie into identity? Where's that playing?
Yeah, it's a good tie into identity. I'm big into neurodiversity. I'm still learning, to be honest. I wouldn't consider myself an expert in that, but I definitely, it's helped me in my story and to understand myself. But it's tied into identity because if you think about the neurodiversity movement, it was started by people in the autistic community. And now it's being picked up also as people with ADHD or what doctors would call ADHD as just neurological difference, which objectively, this is what it is. It's
Yeah.
neurological differences in cognition and emotion, emotional energy, physical energy. And so what we have in society before the neurodiversity movement is the medicalization of this difference of, autism was invented by a psychiatrist, for example, the word autism, ADHD as well. It's like, so what it is, it's about like identifying, right, as everybody is on this vast range of neurological difference cognitively and emotionally. And, autism is one type. And even within autism, it has several, subtypes and it's a range, it's a spectrum. And with ADHD too. And so gifted is another one that's on there. That's people can be gifted intellectually or emotionally, and it's interesting because the whole thing is that neurodiversity recognizes that there are people on the edge of these spectrums, and they are vulnerable, right? someone who has delays in processing cognitively, or someone who experiences strong emotions, they're going to socially be more susceptible to trauma. And so there is relevance and importance to recognizing these as medical vulnerabilities, but they are not in themselves medical conditions. So, in school and social life, instead of someone saying that, oh, this person has symptoms of autism, okay, well, they have indications of autism, right? You remove the medicalization of it and say, well, this person's it's a part of their identity. So that's the biggest part, is I guess how it ties into identity is like, these are social differences. To say that I feel strong emotions, does that mean that I am bipolar, or that I am it's all social perception.
Yeah.
So that's the important part of neurodiversity.
Yeah. Cool. Well, so I wrote a post provocatively titled, "Is Enlightenment a Mental Illness?"
Yeah.
And I wrote that and kind of gave the example of, understanding that there is suffering. The question is like, how do we think about it? How do we categorize it, if we do categorize it, and what's the best way to approach it? And is it best to label that quote unquote mental illness? And
No.
there's certainly some things in one culture that would be considered a gift that another considered a liability. There's no
Yes.
doubt about it, right?
Yes.
And specifically, many of the things, or a range of experience that's qualified as mental illness in this culture, I know for a fact in some aspects of India are considered gifts.
Right.
And there would be people would be asking them about, questions about that. So that's one thing. The other thing that I think of is when we talk about neurodiversity, it's always, neurotypical and neurodiverse, right? What is typical? What is diverse?
Mm.
And what's interesting is that from the second mind perspective,
Mm-hmm.
right, what is neurodiverse is all first minds are neurodiverse. There is
Yes.
no neurotypical. And if there had to be a neurotypical, it would be just the second mind, which all of us are, which every living being is at a deeper level. It is that is neurotypical. In other words, all of us are neurotypical, and we express neurodiversely, or
I love it.
neurodivergently, right? Because even if you look at the terms, neurodivergent is a word that's used, right? So
Right.
what are we diverging from? We're diverging from that commonness, whatever we want to call it, consciousness or
Techno.
intelligence or potential.
Yeah.
So from that neuroconvergence, we're diverging as individuated expressions. So what's interesting is that it goes away from this idea that neurotypical and neurodivergent are within the first mind, so that there are some individuals who
Mm-hmm.
are neurotypical and some who are neurodivergent. And in my view, no. All individuals, by the virtue of the fact that they're individuated, are neurodivergent, if we want to use that terminology. Or I
Yeah.
would say neurodiverse, because divergent has a different connotation, like
I
we're
know.
going off
Yeah.
path. So I would say all individuals are neurodiverse, which, I mean, who can disagree with that? If any understanding of culture would give us that idea that we're all neurodiverse, and that the second mind is actually maybe the neurocommons, the
Yeah.
neurocommons that we all express from.
Yeah. I love it. I think. Yeah, I totally understand, and I do have a. Yeah, I agree on that word of neurodivergent. I don't like that word. I also don't like the word neurotypical. But it's the whole concept of neurodiversity is that everybody's different, um,
Right.
and
Right.
so the whole typical thing is again norming. And if you're trying to move away from norming, which I
Yeah.
am, I think
Yeah.
everybody is. At least I am
Yeah.
trying to move away from norming. But
Yeah.
the problem I have, Anoop, is that if everybody understood this second mind stuff, then you wouldn't need the concept of neurodiversity. You wouldn't need people to advocate for autism as an identity, for ADHD as an identity, and all of these things. But the fact of the matter is that people believe their stories. They believe that some stories are better than others, and so how to navigate this world where I am met with very real trauma based on socially induced affects, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's like now we're in this situation where I wish everybody could unlearn these things, and see it your way.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and what you're speaking to is really the difference between understanding and experience, right? It's the difference between understanding how to swim in the ocean and swimming in the ocean, which is an
Right.
entirely different experience. So this framework is useful. Then the question is, how do we get there? You know, what are the processes for moving beyond that first mind and recognizing the fuller breadth of being human? And I think there are
Hmm.
many ways to do that. I mean, when I see what you do, when I heard what you do, that's what you're doing in a way. You might use a
Yeah.
different language. You're exploring a particular range of moving from the first to the second mind, which is deconditioning the boundary of individuation and saying that,
Yes.
hey, this is not the only boundary that you have. You have other boundaries. You have a choice. It's like a kaleidoscope. You pick and choose a lens, and
100%.
yeah,
Yeah, 100%. And it's almost like your method of meditating and reaching the second mind would definitely facilitate what I'm doing, someone
yeah,
changing their identity. I call it, I forget the word you used, but I call it deconstructing an identity. You
yeah.
said moving past individual. What did you say?
I said deconditioning individuation. Yeah,
It's so it's
same
language,
thing.
right? But it's the
Yeah.
same concept, and it's really interesting. Are you from India originally?
Yeah, so my background is from India. I was born here in Washington, D.C., and then we moved back for a few years, my first several years of life. And that's really kind of my first memories and the formative experiences were just, running around outside in the rain and not wearing shoes, and the doors are open in the rain.
Yeah,
And coming back when I was maybe 5.5 or 6, and I remember the stark difference, right? It
yeah,
was very clear to me that human beings here were like in boxes.
yeah.
You could almost see the physicalization of the mind and and
Mm,
and how that and this kind of this, I am this and not that. Not explicitly. I didn't have the intellectual framework for it, but that
right.
sensation was there. So,
Totally.
yeah.
My wife is from Delhi, in fact,
Okay.
and so my in-laws are Indian, and so I'm seeing this cultural difference a lot, and
Yeah.
it's really, really fresh perspective. I mean, I said this to you on Twitter, like lots of things have to change in the States in order to
Yeah.
really relieve a lot of suffering.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great perspective. Ayurveda,
Yeah.
movement, plants, like food, all of these things, man,
Yeah.
and the concept of interdependence, which we all are. We are
Yeah.
all interdependent, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of denial of that going on in the West for
Yeah.
some reason.
Yeah. Also, I think one of the useful things that I think we can talk about that I can't always talk about with guests is that even this idea of science and then philosophy and spirituality and religion, these are basically ways we make meaning, ways we
Hmm.
make sense of life, right?
Languages,
The
yes.
fundamental experience, like when a newborn comes into the world, there's no construct of science, there's no construct of spirituality, there's no
Right.
construct of religion. There's simply this kind of ebb and flow of experience, we might say. Even that is a construct, but to use words, there's some kind of ebb and flow of experience. And
Mm.
ultimately, we start to categorize that, learn that, and through those experiences, we create disciplines. And we say, well, only this way of navigating experience is useful. That's science. No, no, this way, religion is the best. No, no, spirituality is the best. Whereas in fact, it's simply this flow of stories and this flow
Totally.
of experiences. And the investigation into that ultimately is not an intellectual one. It is just kind of diving into the experience itself.
It's like, what do you want to identify with?
Yeah. Yeah. Still there?
Yeah, yeah, I'm
Yeah,
back.
yeah,
Can you hear me?
yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. So we covered, that was quite a tour of life.
I know, man. I really love it. I hope to keep talking.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me know what ideas you have, and then we can always discuss. I wonder if possible to see some of these. There are a lot of comments. I wonder if maybe we can just pick a couple of these, and I'm not good at navigating the phone while doing this, but let's see.
Can you explain more about Verganond in your post? Um, what else? Somebody said thanks for the neuro explanation. That's nice. Yeah, did you understand that? Verganond? I might be pronouncing that wrong. Virginon, Virgend.
No,
Vergendad? Vergendad? It could
no.
be a typo, autocorrect.
All right, half my screen is missing. I don't know what I'm doing here. Let's see. Yep, we're all just deep down in there inside with different human experiences. I would agree with that. Um,
Yeah, that's the only
so,
question I see.
yeah. So Seguros Calvo, I'm sorry, I don't understand when you say explain more about Vergendad in your post. If you can repost that, maybe we
Hmm.
can address that. Cray Marie said maybe we can transform our trauma and suffering and use what we learned to serve others. That's kind of what you're talking about, right, Greg?
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about is the different stories that you believe, that's how you become traumatized is like, yeah, you know, trauma is a big part of it. I don't work with, like, once I recognize trauma, there's professionals, there's experts that work in this
Yeah.
area
Yeah.
that I've benefited from. But I think once you understand your identity, and your identities, because you have many, right? You choose many. You choose many. You don't have many. You choose many. You understand where your pain comes from. So if you understand that deeply and you understand, what you're saying, that these are just stories and that the second mind is the reality or where we come from, or, then I think that's incredibly healing. It's incredibly healing because you can let go of the story. You can understand the story from above and let go of it. And, oh God,
And you
yeah,
can still access it. You can still access the stories that are useful. It's not like you have to discard all stories because we need stories to interact and to have roles. Oh, we're no longer dependent on them. They become useful and functional. So
yeah,
somebody asked for links. Sorry, go ahead, Greg.
well, it's kind of this concept of social death. It feels like physical death sometimes, and it's really not. It's like people are so scared to lose a relationship or a job or certain parts of that they become so embodied in, and that their emotions are wrapped so tightly around specifically fear of that loss or being bad at it, of not getting it. That can lead to trauma. If you really believe that too much, if you cling to that too much and lose it. And I don't want to people to think that I'm not saying don't care about something, right? There's that. It's like, believe in it, care about it, wrap your emotions in it, but be able to separate. And I think there's a lot of healing in that.
Wonderful. So maybe I can write a few points about this. If you have any links or anything, maybe you can send them to me, and
Yeah,
we can have some resources for people to learn more about identity.
that would be great.
All right. Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, let's keep it going on Twitter. I love it.
All right. Sounds good.
All right, take care. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.